Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. And this video is about some people still, things like map, array, map, filter. Well, these are things you should definitely work to master in JavaScript. They're some of the most important fundamental tools. Sometimes people still have a hard time with these particular pieces. So one way you can kind of make it easier for yourself is that if you have a hard time appreciating what map is doing, okay, what you can do is you can create yourself a looping component. Okay, so a component that does the looping for you, and do it in a way that maybe you're more comfortable looping. So you can do something like this. Okay, so let's create a component. Okay, and I'll create another component called new file looper. And I'll say function looper equals, actually we'll just do it as a normal function keyword, so props. Okay, and then we'll just first create a variable const, myJSX equals an empty array. Okay, and then we just build in a normal for loop based on some array that gets passed in. So we'll say props for item in, actually no, let's just do a standard array. Let's go real old school. Okay, so let I equal 0, I is less than props.r. R will be the prop for the array. Actually, we can just do props.array because it's a property of an object, so we don't have to worry about reserved keywords. Okay, props.array dot length. As long as it's less than the length of the array, we can do the thing. And then I will just do an I++ after each one. So we can just use a standard JavaScript loop, and then what we'll do is we will push something in the array. So we'll sit there and say, hey, in the array, and this is technically what map is doing under the hood, myJSX dot push, and then what we'll do is, actually even before this, what we'll do is we'll create a variable for the item. So we'll say const item equals props dot array. So the current item of the array at that index I, and then we're going to push that item into myJSX, except we're going to pass it through a function. So we're going to say, hey, for every loop, we're going to say, hey, we're going to give this function, and actually first I need to, not an arrow function. We're going to let that be passed in through so we'll say props dot, do, props.do, you'll pass it a function called do, and then each time that function will receive the item and the index. Okay, and then essentially what this component will render is it'll return myJSX. Okay, so essentially we're going to create JSX in this array, and then that's what this looper is going to return. Okay, literally what we just did is we recreated map as a component. That's literally what this is. This is map as a component. But if you're someone who's not fully comfortable with map, this might be something you're more comfortable with. Okay, so semantically, so I can go to app, import looper from /components /looper. Okay, and then I will replace this code, and we'll say, hey, for titles, when to do, actually I won't even need this titles variable anymore. I'm going to use the looper component. Okay, so then inside of titles, I don't need anything there. We just say, hey, I want to use looper, and the array I want to loop over equals title, R. So we pass the R array as a prop. Just gotta type it right. And then we have to pass the do, which has to be a function. Okay, that function receives the item and the index, because that's what we passed into it in the previous page. and that's just going to return. Trying to get this to look a little smoother. There we go. It's going to return for each. This function, what it does, it returns a titles component, where title again equals item.title, and the subtitle equals the item.subtitle, because again it's looping over this array here. And then I should be passing a key prop, so I will just use the index for that. And then there we go. Now what is it not like? I still think I need to close the looper array, or the looper component. You end up kind of with the same thing. Let's see here, title, item. Oh yeah, because I got to wrap these in parentheses. Parentheses, there we go. Okay, you end up with sort of the same deal. Basically I'm saying, hey, here's a looper component. This is the array you're looping over, and this is what I want you to do for each thing in the array. So now if I refresh, type is not expected a string for a class function. We got object. Let's think about this. Okay, let me just see here. Did I export looper? I forgot to export looper. Export default looper. Yep, and there we go. We end up with the same result. It loops over the object, but you know, sometimes if you're not comfortable with like using things like map, maybe just building out the logic of looping and sort of recreating that functionality as a component may not necessarily be the worst thing in the world for you. So in this case, you have this looper component, and then anytime you need to loop over stuff, I can say, okay, hey. And this might semantically also make your code more readable, because oftentimes people see map, they may not immediately know what you're trying to do, but I can say, hey, here, I'm trying to loop. I'm going to loop over this array and do this function for each item on each array. Okay, it's literally map. Okay, we literally just recreated map, but you know, again, this might be an easier way of thinking about it. Same thing for any other kind of situation you have. Like at the end of the day, like you can componentize anything. You can componentize specific logic you may be using over and over again. Like I could create a component called if. Okay, so let's try that. Like I can, you know, now it's not basically, I'm now just pretty much recreating Angular review, and then it's like, okay, why don't you just go use Angular review directives? But you could. Okay, so we can say component called if.js. Okay, and then basically what it does is function. Oh, I can't really call it function if, can I? Because it's a reserved word. Let's call it, rename condition, because I don't think that's a reserved word. So function condition. And this takes in some props. And we will say that all this really does is just return, and then we'll use a fragment. A fragment is a way for us to not have to add an additional div in our JSX, and we'll just say it just shows props.children. Well, at first, 1 second, we'll make this a little bit more fancy. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to use a ternary operator. So we're going to say if props dot if, okay, is true, so basically you're going to pass in sort of some sort of condition. If it's true, then props.children will show up, else it'll just render null, which is something else components can render. They can render JSX or null, and it'll show nothing. And there you go, you have an if statement as essentially an if statement. Now it doesn't like, oh, because I always do that. Okay, it's function keyword or arrow, not both. Okay, I'll just use the function keyword for now. Export default condition. Okay, and now what I can do is I can use this component as kind of like an if statement in my code. Okay, so again, if you don't like writing like ternary operators and whatnot, you can create a component that does the same thing. Import condition from /components, oops, /components / condition.js. Okay, and I can do something like this. I can say, hey, condition. So first I'll just wrap the looper component in condition, but it's going to show nothing because right now I'm not passing it that if prop. So we'll say if, and then again if, we'll say true for now. So if it's true, it shows up. If it's false, it doesn't. Okay. So for example, if you don't feel very comfortable with ternary operators and you rather do it this way, you can do it this way. Like, that's the cool thing about React. It kind of gives you some flexibility on how to do things if you want. So here we go. Yeah. Now let's see here. If, let's say something like, hey, if 5 equals 5, which is going to always be true, it'll always show up. Let me just refresh because it just takes a second. There you go. So there you go. So instead of using ternary operators in map, you could use condition and looper. Like, you can do these things. You can build the tools that you want. Again, this is not your standard sort of React fare, but the point is, like, React wants you to think out of the box. So you can create components that do these things for you, or you can just write them in your normal JavaScript. It's up to you. My name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. Make sure to join the Slack and Discord community over there at devnursery.com. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Follow me on Twitter at alexmercedcoder. Have a great day and enjoy.